All right, welcome to New York Comic Con 2024. This is my first interview of the day for this go around, and I'm with Jordan Mechner, who is the creator of Prince of Persia, and he has two graphic novels out that is going to be talking about. So before we get started talking about those, tell us a little bit about yourself and your history as a comic book reader and as a writer in general.
Sure. Well, we're here in New York Comic Con. This is my hometown. I live in France now for the last 8 years. But I grew up reading Mad Magazine. Mainly that was a formative influence. And I think if computers hadn't come along when they had, like in the late 70s, I probably would have like gone on trying to, become a comics author. But I got sidetracked for about 30 or 40 years making video games. So Karateka and Prince of Persia on the Apple II, The Last Express.
Apple II, yes.
Yep. That's where I started. And Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time with Ubisoft just celebrated its 20th anniversary. So I now live in France, and I'm writing and drawing graphic novels. And this one, Replay, it's an autobiographical graphic novel, and it tells the story of my career making games, but in the context of the story of 3 generations of my family. My dad was a child refugee in France during World War II. My grandfather wrote a memoir when he retired as a doctor in Brooklyn in the 70s, and he wrote about his time as a soldier in World War I.
Mm-hmm.
So the book Replay weaves these 3 timelines together, with Prince of Persia as kind of the narrative through line. So the book, it's called Replay, partly because in a video game that's what you do. To get through Prince of Persia, you have to replay a whole bunch of times. But but it's also replay in the sense that as an American moving back to France 8 years ago, ironically for a video game project, I kind of did the inverse of what my grandparents did to get their kids out of Europe, to the safety of America, during the Nazi regime in World War II. So this is Replay, and it's published by First Second Books.
Okay.
And this is as the first book, I should mention, that I've drawn as well as written. I got into graphic novels about 15 years ago as a writer. I wrote a book called Templar, also for First Second, with Louis Pham and Alex Pouviland. It's kind of a medieval Ocean's 11. And just a little in advance, but next month, Magnetic Press is releasing Monte Cristo. It's a modern version of The Count of Monte Cristo, illustrated by the great Italian illustrator Mario Alberti.
That's really nice looking.
He is an amazing artist. It's an epic cinematic update of Dumas. Of course, his original Monte Cristo is a 19th century book, but this is set in America in the post 9/11 context of the War on Terror. So it's a story of love, betrayal, corruption, revenge, and it's going to be out about a month from now.
So, starting with video games, how did that translate for you into comic books, going from, I guess, writing the story for the screen to the page?
Yeah, it's an interesting journey. In a way, I feel like I've come full circle, because when I started programming games with Prince of Persia in the 80s, at that time, making a game was very much like a solo kind of handicraft operation. Like, to do the animation for Prince of Persia, I videotaped my brother running and jumping and, in his pajamas in the parking lot of our high school, and then pixel by pixel turned that into animation. So being a programmer of a game in those days was sort of like being a comics author, in the sense that you've got the blank page and you write and draw every panel, and there's really no budget, there's no production schedule, but you have complete creative control. So as the game industry evolved, and I worked with bigger and bigger teams on games like The Last Express, Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time, and probably the biggest team of all was the Disney Jerry Bruckheimer Prince of Persia movie, which came out in 2010. I was the first screenwriter on that project. So, I love all of these scales of project, but now coming back to graphic novels, there's an intimacy about it. And, I love the collaboration with teams. I love the collaboration with artists, like, when I work as a writer on Monte Cristo or Templar, it's sort of a very close collaboration between writer and artist to do a comic. But drawing, as I do in Replay, is like the most. It's really a return back to just that. It's just me and the paper.
Yeah. So you work on paper, or?
I do both. I actually started sketching from life in about 15 years ago, and sort of I carry around a notebook in which I sort of sketch.
Oh,
I do life drawing workshops, and I sketch people in cafes, at Comic Cons, things like that.
very
And,
French thing to do.
and it was really working with like great comics artists like Lynn and Alex and Mario that inspired me. Like, I want to draw too. Like, I used to do that when I was a kid. I loved it. It's been so long since I mean, of course, for games, I would draw storyboards, but only as a kind of a part of the production process for the team, like not art as a way to communicate with the person, with a reader, and that's so it's just there's something very satisfying to me about drawing, and especially drawing from life. So in Replay, I tried to draw the way that I would draw if these things were happening in front of me. Although, of course, because I'm drawing things from the past, from my childhood, and even from the 1930s, the 1900s, I had to like draw on a lot of historical references. But yeah, I love to.
Now, when you were working on Replay, did you learn anything about your past that maybe you didn't know, or?
Absolutely. I mean, I had the good luck to grow up with, my dad and my grandparents openly talked about what they'd experienced with the war, and which is not always the case in families, where parents or grandparents had lived through, war, displacement, or hard times. So I had the benefit of their memories, and also, photos and documents that my grandfather collected into a memoir. So I think this sort of tendency to kind of document and want to tell the family story goes maybe comes from the family.
Yeah.
By the way, I published my journals from the making of my video games, Karateka and Prince of Persia, like as books. I mean, those, like when I kept those journals in the 80s, I thought I would never show them to anybody, but here, I went ahead and published them. So to delve into the documentation for Replay, of course, I had all of that to start with, which was great, but I had to do supplemental researches, and I traveled in France to the towns that my dad had been to as a child. He was 7 years old when the family escaped Nazi-occupied Austria in 1938, and then he got stuck in France for 3 years, separated from his parents. And it was his young aunt who was taking care of him, and so he told me about their adventures in a seaside town, Le Touquet, and they were there like in the midst of the German invasion and the Dunkirk evacuation and all of that. So just these stories of survival that he remembered though as a 8, 9-year-old kid. So in order to draw these things in Replay, I had to like really go to these places and also do the historical research to figure out what everything looked like. I mean, but in the process, I found out things that even my dad didn't know. I mean, confirmed that his recollections were accurate, but also things that as a kid he didn't know. For example, one story that he told me about their time in Le Touquet, his aunt worked in a tobacco shop there in this French town, which was occupied by the Germans. And so most of the customers in the store were Luftwaffe pilots. And my dad, and as a kid, and his aunt became friends with one of the pilots who was just coming in to buy cigarettes. And of course, this shouldn't have happened. As Jewish refugees, and a Nazi Luftwaffe pilot, they shouldn't have been friends. But they were also just three young people far from home. German was their native language, and so they became friends. And this pilot, when this pilot was shot down, it was like my dad was conflicted because as a kid, of course, he wanted Germany to lose the war as fast as possible so that he could be reunited with his parents, and and the family would survive. But that didn't mean that he wanted his friend to get shot down. And so he told me the story. He told me about Willy. And so I actually, incredibly, with the help of a Danish historian who specializes in the stories of these pilots, found the military card for Willy. And so found out his last name, where he was from, that he had a wife and a daughter in Hamburg, where he was shot down. And it happened the exact week that my dad that matched with what my dad had told me. So he was really touched to hear this. Like, I mean, he's now 93 years old and still very sharp. And so these memories are so vivid. But as a psychologist, he also knows that memories can kind of evolve. And sometimes 80 years later, you remember things that didn't actually happen. But here was the confirmation that Willy had really existed.
Has he read your book yet?
Yeah.
What were his thoughts? Or
my dad was really touched to read Replay. I mean, to read his childhood adventures in comic form, but also to read about like his dad's childhood and youth in Chernovitz, which was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire at that time. Now it's part of Ukraine. And just to see the whole family story kind of told in this form, I think it really it made him happy.
So going over to your other book, what was about the story of Monte Cristo that made you want to kind of do an updated uh, version of it?
Yeah, I mean, I having moved to France, and reading, I mean, Alexandre Dumas has always been one of my literary heroes. I think his spirit kind of infuses all of my video games, from Prince of Persia to The Last Express, and Templar is kind of a, it's almost like in the Three Musketeers spirit of historical fiction, where it's set against a real historical background, but the characters are fictional, and it's like Ocean's 11 in the 14th century. So I was reading the original Monte Cristo, and it just struck me that as an American, like, we just sort of lived through a period here, with the war on terror and the invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan, kind of, and then Guantanamo providing a kind of a, like, it was a context of fear, where, because everybody was so afraid of terrorist attacks, this kind of justified abridging civil rights, and like people getting put into offshore prisons without a trial. And looking back now, it's like, okay, yeah, that was a period in which this things that wouldn't have happened normally did happen, and that was exactly what Dumas was describing in Monte Cristo. In his case, it was the return of Napoleon was the public fear that was so great that it justified sending, packing off an innocent, young sailor into an offshore prison where he wouldn't be seen for 15 years. So it just resonated so much. And like, it's, he said it in the 19th century, but it's really like the themes are universal of how power corrupts, and how people can, even with good intentions, can kind of use their position to kind of achieve their own ends, and how innocent people can suffer, and also the corrupting effect of vengeance. How sometimes you want revenge, but what you really need is redemption. All of that translated just so beautifully to the present day.
And I know earlier you said that Mad Magazine was a influence, and noticed that your sketchbook over there has the Norman Rockwell Museum. So
yes.
Did you get over there I assume you went over there to see the Mad exhibit?
I did. I was there 2 days ago. It was my first time going to the Norman Rockwell Museum, and actually it was my first time seeing these original Mad Magazine panels. I didn't realize they were so big.
Yeah.
It's I grew up on that in the, I guess I was probably 9-10 years old when I started going to St. Mark's Comics and collecting the old like late 60s, early 70s issues of Mad, which had movie parodies. Like, I mean, even before I was old enough to see like A Clockwork Orange or The Godfather, I was reading the Mad Magazine parodies.
Yeah, I was telling my wife, she goes, "You were allowed to have Mad Magazine?" I was like, "Yeah," because I remember the one I had a they were spoofing Cocktail, and like that is a movie that I was did not see as a kid.
Yeah, oh, you're way younger than I am. So, I mean, for me, it was really like that period of the 70s. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and kind of also Vietnam and Watergate. Like, as a kid, like learning about politics and like advertising, sort of through this kind of mad lens. Like in a way, it kind of makes you precocious.
Right.
But also, it's like all this information about the adult world that's can't get any other way. Finally, they're telling you the truth, like the hypocrisy that's behind school and politics, and the war and all of that stuff. And as far as the artwork, I mean, I was a caricaturist as a kid. Like, before the Apple II, I actually made the money to buy my first Apple II that I started programming in by doing caricatures at the local community fair in Chappaqua. And so that was sort of my goal, was to get a likeness, in a few lines, so where you would really, and of course, that's what I tried to do in Replay now, with members of my family and other people, to draw them so that you look at them and go, yeah, that's him. Yeah. Well, the Mad artists were just masters of that. Jack Davis and Mort Drucker, and I idolized Mort Drucker so much that for a while I signed my name with the M being 3 vertical lines, just like he did. I made my own sort of Mad Magazine knockoff called Kooky Magazine when I was in 6th grade, and I actually got a job at a printing shop so that we could run off offset copies of Kooky Magazine, and I sold them in the schoolyard. So in a way, that was my first graphic novel, and Replay is my second. But there was 50 years separating them.
So what other plans do you have for here at the New York Comic Con?
I'll be signing today at the First Second booth. at 3 in the afternoon, and a few interviews here. Then tomorrow I'll be signing at St. Mark's Comics, my childhood comic shop, which is now in Brooklyn. It's no longer on St. Mark's Place, but living in France, it's always like a special pleasure to come back to New York.
So if you want to kind of give a couple pitches for the two books and then where people can find the rest of your stuff, then that would be great.
Great. So I have a website, jordanmechner.com is, and there there's all the information about the comic books, but also about the old video games. So there's a lot of behind the scenes stuff of the making of Prince of Persia and so forth. Replay is my autobiographical graphic memoir from first, second books. And this you can find out about it at jordanmechner.com. You can also get it on Amazon and from Macmillan first, second. Monte Cristo, you can pre-order it now.
Did they crowdfund that?
Yes.
I was gonna say it looked familiar. That's why it looks familiar to me.
Magnetic Press crowdfunded the English edition of Monte Cristo, which is going to be out at the beginning of December.
Okay.
And if you kickstarted it, you can get this.
That's nice.
This die cut limited collector's edition. These literally just arrived in the mail yesterday, and they'll be shipping in a few weeks. Both of these books are out in French, and Replay and Monte Cristo were published first in French, and then the English versions following. So again, jordanmechner.com has all the information and all the links for both of these books.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time during your show. I'm sure you're going to be busy, but thanks for chatting with us, and have a great show.
Thank you.